The slap landed before the pastor could finish the prayer. Chief Mrs. Aduni Balogun's palm cut across Amara's face so sharply that the sound echoed against the church walls and silenced even the whispering children in the back row. For 1 second, nobody moved. Not the choir in their cream robes, not the women in matching gold jele, not the men in polished shoes holding phones halfway in the air, not even the pastor standing beneath the cross with his Bible still open in his hand. Amara stood at the altar in white satin and coral beads, one cheek burning, eyes wide, lips parted in disbelief. And before the pain had even settled, Aduni reached for the beads around Amara's neck. Not gently, not with the trembling confusion of a mother overcome by emotion. No. She unclasped them with the confidence of a woman correcting a mistake she believed never should have happened. Then she turned away from the bride, walked down the aisle, and stopped in front of Tundday Akinleye. Tundday was seated in the second row, in a fitted champagne dress that was expensive enough to be disrespectful and close enough to white to feel deliberate. Her hand had been resting low over her stomach all morning, like she was guarding a secret. She did not look shocked. She looked ready. Aduni lifted the coral beads and placed them around Tundday's neck in full view of everyone, like she was crowning the woman she had chosen all along. The cameras kept recording. Someone in the front gasped. Someone near the back laughed once, then covered it with a cough. The pastor adjusted his glasses but said nothing. And Tundday? Tundday Balogun, the groom, the man who had sworn 3 nights ago that nothing in this world would stop him from marrying Amara, stood frozen in his black tuxedo, with his jaw tight and his eyes lowered, like a coward waiting for weather to pass. He did not step forward. He did not touch her. He did not say, "Mother, stop." He didn't say anything. Amara stood there with her face burning and her neck suddenly bare, humiliated in front of God, family, cameras, and strangers. And the people doing this to her had no idea that the hotel where they planned to celebrate, the warehouses that kept their supermarket chain alive, and the logistics company quietly carrying half their imported stock, all traced back to one private holding group. A holding group with one living heir. The woman they had just slapped at the altar. But to understand how Amara got there, you have to go back. Not to that church in Lagos, not to the wedding. You have to go back to a red earth road outside Nsukka, where the rain smelled like wet leaves, kerosene, and memory, and where a quiet little girl was raised to survive pain without ever learning how powerful her name really was. Amara grew up in a small house with a rusted zinc roof and a mango tree that leaned so close to the window its branches scratched the wall whenever the wind was high. People in the village said the house sighed at night. It was an old house, the kind that carried every year inside its wood. Her mother died giving birth to her. That was the first story she ever learned about herself. Not from cruelty, not from gossip, just from repetition. "Your mother loved you," her Auntie Kosi would say. "She loved you enough to leave her whole life in your cry." As for her father, Auntie Kosi said less. Not because she hated him, because she feared what his name carried. Whenever Amara asked, Auntie Kosi would wipe her hands on her wrapper, look out at the road, and say the same thing every time. "Your father did not abandon you. He left this world before he could return properly. That is all you need for now." For now. That phrase shaped Amara's childhood. It sat in the room like another person, invisible, but always there. For now, she was too young. For now, there were things she would understand later. For now, she should focus on school. For now, life was simple. But life was never simple. They were not starving, but they were never comfortable. Auntie Kosi sold smoked fish, cassava, and ground pepper in the market 3 days a week. She stitched school uniforms in the evenings under a rechargeable lamp when power failed, which was often. Amara learned early how to stretch things, to make one exercise book last 2 terms, to wash white socks so carefully they looked new from a distance, to chew slowly when dinner was small, to say, "I'm fine," when she was not. She was the sort of child who didn't cry loudly. Pain went inward with her. When other children mocked her because she had no parents at school visiting day, she didn't fight. She simply stood straighter, held her pencil tighter, and buried herself in work until silence became her protection. Auntie Kosi used to watch her from the doorway and say, half proud and half worried, "This child bends like bamboo. I just pray one day she also learns how to stand like Iroko." On Amara's 16th birthday, Auntie Kosi gave her 2 things. The first was a small brass key on a faded blue ribbon. The second was a locked wooden box with carved corners and a crack along one side. "Keep this," Auntie Kosi said. "When your spirit is strong enough, open it." Amara laughed and asked what was inside. Auntie Kosi did not laugh back. "When your spirit is strong enough," she repeated. That answer lived in Amara's mind for years. She would lift the box sometimes, feel its weight, shake it gently, hear paper shift inside, then set it back under her bed and leave it alone. Life kept moving. She finished secondary school with good grades and left for Lagos with 1 suitcase, 1 pair of black flats, the wooden box, and a determination so quiet, most people mistook it for weakness. Lagos did what Lagos does. It did not welcome her. It tested her. She shared a 1-room apartment in Yaba with 2 girls who changed every 6 months because rent was always rising and stability was a luxury. She worked first at a bakery, then at a phone accessories stall, then as a receptionist in a small import office where men spoke too loudly and paid too little. She learned bus routes, learned traffic patience, learned how to smile just enough to keep a job and go silent enough to keep her dignity. By 26, she was working as an administrative assistant for a mid-sized distribution company on the mainland. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. She dressed neatly, arrived early, never complained, and kept her private life tucked so far inside herself that even coworkers who liked her knew almost nothing about her. That is the version of Amara Tundday Balogun met, the quiet woman with clean handwriting, soft eyes, and a way of listening that made men believe she understood them better than they deserved. He saw her first at a corporate charity luncheon in Victoria Island. She was not supposed to be the memorable person in that room. There were socialites there, influencers, politicians' wives, women in designer lace and perfume so expensive it seemed to arrive before they did. Amara had come on behalf of her boss because he was stuck in traffic. She wore a simple navy dress and low heels. Nothing about her was designed to perform. And maybe that was what caught Tundday. He was used to being noticed, used to women leaning toward him before he finished speaking, used to rooms parting around the Balogun name, but Amara did not orbit him. He sat beside her, made a joke. She smiled politely. He tried again. This time she looked at him fully, and something in her calm unsettled him. Not because she was cold, because she was not impressed. He asked for her number before the event ended. She refused the first time. He grinned like that made the game sweeter. He asked again the following week. Flowers appeared at her office. Lunch was sent to her desk. Then dinner invitations. Then apology texts if she declined. Then long voice notes telling her she was unlike anyone he had ever met. And Amara, who had spent most of her adult life being overlooked unless someone wanted something from her, did not fall because she was foolish. She fell because being chosen with that much effort can feel like being seen by God after years of standing in a crowd. Tundday Balogun came from one of those Lagos families that mistook visibility for importance. They owned a fast-growing supermarket chain called Balogun Fresh Mart, 2 upscale event spaces, and a branded import business that liked to describe itself as legacy commerce, even though the real fortune was barely 20 years old. They were not old aristocracy, but they were rich enough to behave as if money had rewritten history in their favor. His mother, Chief Mrs. Aduni Balogun, was the axis around which that house turned. Aduni believed in 3 things: family reputation, public image, control. She chaired women's church committees, hosted charity galas, and quoted scripture with the same mouth she used to humiliate caterers when the soup was too thin. The first time Amara met her, it happened at Sunday lunch in Ikoyi. The dining table looked like a furniture showroom. Crystal bowls, imported cutlery, white orchids in the center. Air conditioning so cold it made the food taste expensive. Aduni looked Amara over once and asked where her people were from. Amara answered politely. "And your father?" Aduni asked. It sounded simple, but in that room it was inventory. Amara said quietly that her mother had passed and she had been raised by her aunt. Aduni gave a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "So, no real family structure," she said. The room moved on, but Amara heard it. Tundday heard it too. Later, he squeezed her hand and told her not to mind his mother. Said she was old-fashioned. Said she would come around. Said people like Aduni tested everyone before accepting them. He always had a way of making cruelty sound temporary. That was one of his talents. Another was knowing exactly when to be tender. When Amara withdrew, he leaned in. When she hesitated, he reassured. When his mother made some quiet remark about breeding, class, or a girl with no roots, Tundday would hold Amara afterward and say all the right things. "You are enough. My mother doesn't define our future. I love you for your heart. I want peace, not status." And if a woman has spent her whole life surviving without a safety net, peace can sound very close to love. They dated for almost 3 years. He moved fast, then slow, then fast again. Sometimes he disappeared into family issues or business pressure. Sometimes he came back with gifts too large for the silence that had come before them. Amara noticed things, but not all at once. A cologne she didn't recognize on his shirt. Late-night calls taken on the balcony. His phone placed face down more often than before. A distance in him that appeared and vanished like harmattan haze. But doubt is hard to hold when someone keeps returning with warmth. He proposed on a rooftop restaurant overlooking the lagoon. A violinist played in the corner. The ring was elegant, tasteful, not vulgar. When he slid it onto her finger, Amara cried, because somewhere deep inside her, the lonely girl from the Red Earth Road believed she had finally reached the part of life where things stopped being uncertain. Aduni did not oppose the engagement publicly. That would have been too crude. Instead, she smiled for photographs and sharpened herself in private. She told friends Amara was soft-spoken, which is useful. She told her sister that Tundday had chosen a manageable girl. She told one church elder that girls without family came cheap because they had no backing. Amara never heard those lines directly. She learned them later. But even before she knew the words, she felt the temperature. The wedding planning became a war disguised as logistics. Aduni wanted everything controlled through her people: her caterer, her decorator, her choir, her guest list, her church, her seating chart. Whenever Amara suggested something simple, Aduni called it unsophisticated. Whenever she preferred something modest, Aduni called it embarrassing. Tundday always played mediator. Just let my mother have this one. You know how she is. It's only one day. After the wedding, it'll just be us. That sentence ruined many women long before Amara was born. After the wedding, it'll just be us. But there was someone else already standing in that future. Her name was Tundday Akinleye, and by the time Amara tried on her final gown, Tundday had been in Tundday's life far longer than any honest man would have admitted. The church was full by noon. White flowers lined the aisle. Gold ribbons wrapped the pews. Cameras glided like insects on metal arms. Inside the sanctuary, the air smelled of perfume, polished wood, and expensive expectation. Amara looked beautiful. Not because a team had made her beautiful, because grace sat naturally on her. Her gown was fitted through the waist and fell clean to the floor without too much sparkle. Her makeup was soft. Her hair was styled beneath a veil, and the coral beads Tundday's family had insisted she wear at the reception had been brought forward into the ceremony at Aduni's sudden request that morning. A family honor, Aduni had called them. An acceptance. Amara should have recognized the theater in that. But hope makes even intelligent women misread danger when it comes wrapped as belonging. The choir sang. The pastor prayed. Tundday stood at the altar looking handsome and distant, like a man wearing his own face incorrectly. Then the vows began, and the room changed. Aduni rose from the front row with the stillness of someone who had already practiced her entrance. She walked in a lavender lace wrapper and blouse with diamonds at her ears and judgment in every step. At first, people smiled, thinking perhaps it was some symbolic mother's blessing. Then she reached the altar. Her eyes did not go to her son. They went to Amara. Up close, her face carried no trembling, no confusion, no last-minute grief, only decision. "You will not wear my family's honor," Aduni said. And before anyone processed the sentence, her hand struck Amara's cheek. The church gasped. Amara's head turned with the force of it. Her veil shifted. Her earrings trembled. And then Aduni unclasped the coral beads at her neck, not ripping them, not snatching. She removed them with calculated disgust, as if cleansing the family name from the wrong skin. Then she walked down the aisle, stopped before Tundday, and fastened the beads around her neck while half the room watched in disbelief and the other half watched in recognition. Because some of them knew. Not the whole story, but enough to understand that this was not spontaneous. Tundday stood. Tundday looked away. The pastor lowered his head, then raised it again and remained silent. That silence said more than any sermon ever could. Amara stood there with a burning face and an empty throat. Then Aduni spoke again, loud enough for the whole church. "This family will not be tied to a girl with no lineage when the rightful mother of our next generation is standing here." Amara looked at Tundday. Not the crowd, not Aduni, not Sade. Tundday. And in that second, she understood something devastating. This was not chaos. This was permission. Because men may not orchestrate every cruelty, but when they stand still while it happens, they sign it with their silence. Amara waited for him to deny it. He said nothing. So Amara turned and walked out of her own wedding, not running, not screaming, just walking down the aisle in white satin, while camera lenses followed her, and guests moved their knees aside, and women who had smiled at her during bridal showers suddenly found the floor fascinating. Outside, the Lagos sun was bright enough to feel offensive. Behind the church doors, she heard movement, then voices, then music. They were continuing. That was the part that hurt most. Not the slap, not the beads, the continuation. As if her humiliation had only been an administrative correction before the real celebration could begin. Amara sat on the church steps for a long minute, breathing carefully. Her phone buzzed 4 times in her bag. When she finally looked, there were no messages from Tundday. Only one missed call from an unknown number in Abuja. She ignored it. At that moment, she still believed the worst thing in her life had already happened. She did not yet know what waited after the wedding dress came off. Amara went back to the apartment she had shared with Tundday for 8 months. The flowers from the night before were still there. Gift boxes, wedding shoes, scented candles. A steaming iron left unplugged on the dresser. It looked like a life paused. She sat at the edge of the bed, still wearing her gown, and waited for the version of events that would save her from the truth. He did not come that day, not that night, not the next morning. Messages from acquaintances began arriving first. "I'm so sorry. Call me if you need anything. Please ignore social media. People are wicked." Social media. Amara hadn't even checked. Clips were already circulating. The slap, the beads, her leaving the church. People slowed the video down, added captions, argued in comment sections about lineage, class, shame, village girls, rich men, wicked mothers. Her pain had become content before she'd had time to name it. Tundday arrived late the second evening, not with flowers, not with remorse, with a weekender bag. He stood near the door like a guest delivering bad news to the wrong house. Sade was pregnant. 4 months. His mother had known for weeks. There had been discussions, pressure, timing. The wedding, he said, had become complicated. Complicated. He used the word like it had not ruined her life in front of hundreds of witnesses. Amara listened without blinking. Tundday continued. Sade came from a stronger family, a better social match. The baby changed everything. His mother believed the family had to think long-term. Amara heard the words, but what she really heard was translation. You were never the final choice. You were acceptable until a more profitable future arrived. You were easy to display because you had nobody powerful enough to defend you. He told her the apartment lease was in his name, told her he would make arrangements for her to move. told her it was best they both handled things quietly. Quietly. The nerve of cruel men is always strongest after they have destroyed someone gentle. Amara asked only one question. Did you know before the wedding? Tundday looked away. That was enough. Still, after a silence, he answered. Yes. The room changed shape around her. There is a kind of pain that does not feel like fire. It feels like subtraction. Amara did not scream, did not throw anything, did not plead. She asked one more question. Why ask me to marry you? Tundday rubbed his jaw. You were stable, he said. You made me feel settled. With you, everything looked clean. Clean. As if she had been a pressed shirt, a polished image. A calm woman to stand beside him while the real appetite of his life lived elsewhere. He left before midnight. By the end of the week, Amara was in a roadside hotel off the expressway with one suitcase, her wooden box, and a wedding dress zipped into a garment bag she could not bring herself to throw away. She stopped going to work, stopped answering calls, stopped eating proper meals. She existed in halves, morning half, night half, public half, empty half. People imagine heartbreak as tears. Sometimes heartbreak is quieter than that. Sometimes it is staring at a cracked ceiling while traffic hums outside and realizing there is no one you can call at 2 a.m. because the one person who would have held you through it, the aunt who raised you, is dead. And when grief strips everything else away, old instructions return. After the third sleepless night, Amara pulled the wooden box onto the bed. The brass key was still tied to its faded ribbon. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it. Inside were documents, a photograph, a sealed cream envelope, and a signet ring wrapped in cloth. The photograph showed a dark-skinned man in a charcoal caftan standing beside a line of container trucks at a port. He looked serious, reserved, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. The envelope carried the name of a law firm, Okonkwo, Bassi, and Diala, private estates and corporate trusts. It had been dated 11 years earlier, addressed to Miss Amara Okeke. She opened it slowly, and the first sentence rearranged her entire life. The letter informed her that she was the sole surviving beneficiary of a private inheritance structure established by her late father, Chief Emeka Okeke, founder of Ebony Gate Holdings. Amara read the name once, then again, then a third time. Chief Emeka Okeke, the man in the photograph. Her father. Auntie Kosi had never said his name out loud. Not once. The letter requested immediate contact with the firm upon her 18th birthday. She was 29. The delay was not small. The delay was a lifetime. She stared at the pages until the words blurred. Then she found another folded note, handwritten in Auntie Kosi's script. My daughter, if you are opening this, then pain has finally made you ready for truth. Forgive me for the years of silence. I was protecting you the only way I knew how. Your father loved you. He also lived in a world where love was dangerous. The people around his money were sharp, greedy, and patient. When he died, he made me promise that you would not be dragged into that world until you had a spine strong enough to survive it. If life has pushed you to this box, then maybe your spine is ready. Go and hear your name fully. Do not let anybody shame you again. Amara cried then, not loudly, just once. The next morning, she called the number on the letterhead. The receptionist did not treat her like a stranger. That frightened her more than anything. She was given an appointment 2 days later at the firm's office in Abuja. When she arrived, she was led into a cool office lined with dark wood shelves and framed maps of ports, roads, and inland freight routes. A man in his 60s stood behind the desk when she entered. His name was Barrister Paul Diala. He looked at her for a long moment and said quietly, "You have your father's eyes." Paul Diala told her the story in layers. Emeka Okeke had not been a politician or flashy billionaire. He had been something more dangerous. Patient. He built Ebony Gate Holdings from freight, warehousing, inland logistics, refrigerated storage, and commercial transport corridors connecting ports to major distribution hubs across Nigeria and West Africa. He bought facilities nobody respected at the time. Old depots, storage yards, warehouse land on the edge of growth. He did not chase headlines. He chased infrastructure. And because most wealthy people love visible luxury more than invisible systems, Emeka grew rich in the shadows while louder men fought for attention. By the time he died, Ebony Gate controlled strategic pieces of movement itself. Not just goods, flow, food imports, medical refrigeration, supermarket supply chains, event beverage routes, cross-state transport contracts, cold room leasing. When Amara's mother died during childbirth, Emeka's protectiveness sharpened into fear. He placed the inheritance in layered trusts, moved ownership through holding entities, and asked Auntie Kosi, his cousin from the village, to raise his daughter away from Lagos, away from attention, away from the predators who circle visible wealth. Then Emeka died in a late-night highway crash when Amara was 6. Not scandalous, not cinematic, just sudden. And because the trust was structured to mature with the heir, Paul Diala's firm had managed everything quietly ever since, waiting for the moment Amara was old enough, or broken enough, to seek the truth. Paul placed several folders on the desk: property summaries, corporate charts, holding agreements, bank statements, board minutes. Then he translated the numbers into reality. "The conference hotel, where the Baloguns planned your wedding reception," he said, "operates on a long-term management lease from one of your father's hospitality entities." He slid another paper forward. "2 Balogun Fresh Mart distribution centers rely on cold storage contracts serviced by Ebony Gate subsidiaries." Another document. "And their import arm routes nearly 40% of its high-value perishables through one of your logistics corridors." Amara stared at him. He continued, gently, "They have been doing business on your father's system for years. They just never knew the hand at the top." The room felt suddenly very quiet. Paul then showed her one final file. The Baloguns were hosting a lavish family Thanksgiving and Union celebration in 5 days at the Harbor Crest Grand, one of the flagship hospitality properties under her indirect ownership. It was a public repositioning, a controlled rewrite of what had happened at the church. By the time the city finished seeing those photographs, Amara would become a footnote, and Sade would become destiny. Paul asked, "Would you like that event to proceed without correction?" Amara looked down at the signet ring on the desk. Her father's ring. Heavy, quiet, plain gold with a dark stone. She touched it with one fingertip. Then she lifted her head. "When does it start?" she asked. The Harbor Crest Grand glowed that evening like a place built to impress men who confuse chandeliers with permanence. Gold drapery, crystal centerpieces, live saxophone in one corner, caterers in white gloves moving between tables with trays of grilled prawns and champagne flutes. The Baloguns had spared no expense. Why would they? If you bury scandal under enough lighting, music, and fabric, people often choose the prettier version of events. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom was full. Influencers took photographs against the floral wall. Business associates toasted Tundday's new chapter. Churchwomen smiled too widely. Men who had pretended not to see Amara's humiliation now congratulated Adunni on how gracefully the family handled a delicate matter. Handled. That word again. Sade wore fitted ivory silk with coral at her ears. Her hand rested over her stomach every few minutes like punctuation. Tundday wore navy. Adunni wore triumph. Then the doors opened. Amara entered alone. No glitter, no revenge gown, no exaggerated glamour. She wore a structured black dress with long sleeves, simple heels, hair pulled back, and one ring on her right hand. Her father's signet ring. That was all. But grief had changed something in her face. She no longer looked like a woman waiting to be chosen. She looked like a woman who had remembered herself. Conversations thinned. The saxophone faltered. A waiter nearly dropped a tray. Adunni turned first. Her smile froze before it disappeared. Tundday's body went still. Sade's eyes narrowed. Amara did not rush. She walked calmly toward the center of the ballroom, while whispers moved ahead of her like wind through dry leaves. Is that her? Why is she here? After what happened? Who invited her? Amara stopped beside the central floral display and turned, not to the stage, but to the room. A second figure entered behind her. Barrister Paul Diala, carrying a slim leather folder. Then another. A woman in a navy suit, the group operations director for Ebony Gate Hospitality. Then one more. The legal head of the cold chain subsidiary that serviced Balogun Fresh Mart. This was not drama. This was documentation. Adunni recovered first. "Security," she said, smiling through it. "There seems to be confusion." Amara's voice came soft and level. "There is no confusion." The room hushed further. Amara looked at Adunni, then Tundday, then Sade, and said, "My name is Amara Okeke, daughter of Chief Emeka Okeke, founder of Ebony Gate Holdings." Nobody moved, because the name hit the room in pieces. Ebony Gate. People in import, hospitality, and distribution knew that name. Paul Diala opened the folder. Documents were placed on the nearest table under the chandelier light. Management rights, service agreements, ownership maps. Amara continued. "The hotel hosting this event stands under a lease structure connected to my father's estate. 2 of the Balogun distribution centers operate under service dependencies tied to Ebony Gate. Your family's import chain, Mrs. Balogun, has spent years growing fat on contracts signed under a system you never respected enough to understand." Silence. Heavy. Total. Adunni's face changed first. Not with guilt, with calculation. Tundday stepped forward finally. "Amara." She raised one hand. He stopped. That small obedience embarrassed him more than anything else ever could. "I stood in a church while your mother struck me and dressed another woman in the honor you promised me," Amara said. "You said nothing. So tonight, I came only to return the favor. I also will say very little. Guests stared. No music, no clinking cutlery. Only the air conditioning and the hum of people realizing they may have chosen the wrong side too publicly. Paul Diala spoke then, professional and emotionless. Effective immediately, all discretionary extensions under the current hospitality arrangement are suspended pending beneficial owner review. Ebony Gate Cold Serve is also reviewing pricing and priority access across all Balogun-linked distribution contracts. Sade's hand dropped from her stomach. Tundday looked like the floor had shifted. Aduni gripped the back of a chair. "Are you threatening us?" she asked. Amara looked at her for a long second. "No," she said. "I am introducing myself." Then she turned and walked out of the ballroom. No shouting, no speech about revenge, no theatrical laughter, just truth. Properly dressed, leaving the room after setting itself on the table. Collapse rarely arrives like thunder. It arrives like invoices, like revised terms, like delayed calls, like lawyers who no longer sound accommodating, like suppliers who suddenly remember market rates, like bankers who stop laughing during meetings. The Baloguns discovered this slowly. First came the contract reviews. Ebony Gate Cold Serve adjusted warehouse and refrigeration costs to full commercial rates. Not punishment, just reality. Then came scheduling changes. Priority unloading windows shifted. Preferred transport lanes tightened. Credit flexibilities vanished. Service bundles were unbundled. Balogun Fresh Mart began bleeding quietly. Imported perishables spoiled faster. Delivery timing slipped. Costs rose. Managers panicked. Accountants stopped sleeping. The Harbor Crest Grand's board declined to renew the family's ceremonial management privileges for future events. Then, banks began asking about exposure. Markets smell weakness faster than pity ever arrives. Tunde's father, Kunle Balogun, finally erupted. He asked Tundday if he had known who Amara was. Tundday said no. Kunle slapped the table hard enough to shake the water glasses and shouted that it did not matter whether she was rich or poor. No sane family publicly disgraces a woman without first understanding what stands behind her. That was the businessman in him speaking, not morality. Risk. Aduni blamed Tundday for letting an ordinary girl become dangerous. Tundday blamed Aduni for turning private betrayal into public spectacle. Sade watched the family from inside the blast radius and did what practical opportunists always do when the numbers turn. She began stepping back. Her calls came less often. Her appearances with Tundday became fewer. The glow of public victory dimmed. Within 6 weeks, she had moved out of the service department Tundday arranged for her and returned to her mother's house. By the second month, she was not answering Tunday's calls after 9 p.m. Love built on advantage usually leaves through the same door it entered. Aduni's suffering was different. Public. Church members learned that the beautiful Thanksgiving event had ended early in embarrassment. Business associates heard that contract pressure had followed. Society women began using careful tones around her, which is the upper-class version of smelling blood. Then the wedding footage resurfaced. Not because Amara posted it, because once the city sensed there was more to the story, people went hunting for the original cruelty. Clips spread again with new captions. She slapped the owner's daughter. The girl they mocked was richer than all of them. Pride before destruction. The internet exaggerated, but buried in all the noise was one truth that could not be erased. They had shamed the wrong woman. And Lagos, for all its chaos, loves a reversal. Tundday tried to reach Amara, at first by phone. She had changed her number. Then by email. No reply. Then by going to her former office. She had resigned. Then by tracing her hometown. Too late. He wrote letters. 3, then 5, then one longer than the rest. She did not read any of them. Some doors, once closed by betrayal, should remain closed by wisdom. Amara did not become loud after the reveal. That surprised people. Lagos expected performance, interviews, society pages, photos of a wronged woman reborn in designer labels. But Amara had not spent her whole life in silence just to become spectacle the minute wealth found her. She learned the business instead. She met division heads, studied route maps, read contracts late into the night, asked questions nobody thought the hidden daughter from Nsukka would ask. Why is spoilage higher on this corridor? Which leases expire within 18 months? Why are we underinvested in local cold room capacity? Who handles staff welfare at the logistics hub? At first, executives answered cautiously, then with respect. Because the thing about quiet people is that when they finally begin speaking with knowledge behind them, noisy men often discover they have mistaken silence for emptiness. Her father had not left her luxury first. He had left her systems, warehouses that fed markets, transport routes that kept medicine cold, distribution chains that made invisible movement possible, a hotel group, portside yards, fuel contracts, staff pensions, rural land banks. Amara visited one of Ebony Gate's oldest facilities in Port Harcourt 3 months after the Harbor Crest incident. It was not glamorous. Concrete, diesel air, forklift noise, steel doors, fluorescent lights. But when she stood on the loading platform and watched containers move, she felt something click inside her. This, she thought, was her father's language. Not champagne. Movement. Reliability. Infrastructure. Things that hold society together without applause. That understanding changed her. For the first time in her life, she was not merely surviving circumstances created by other people. She was shaping them. Not vindictively, competently. Paul Diala asked her once whether she wanted to force the Baloguns into total ruin. Amara stirred her tea and thought of the slap, the church, the beads. Then she thought of Auntie Kosi stitching uniforms by lantern light. "No," she said. "I only want truth to cost them what lies used to save." That sentence guided every decision she made after. No illegal retaliation. No theatrical punishment. No abuse of power. Just an end to all hidden mercy. The market would do the rest. And it did. By the following rainy season, the Balogun household no longer sounded like success. It sounded like doors closing. Kunle Balogun spent most days trying to save what could be saved. Branch divestments were discussed. Asset sales whispered. Expansion plans frozen. Staff downsizing considered. Tundday, once the polished son everyone expected to inherit confidently, moved through those months like a man followed by his own reflection. He drank more, spoke less, stopped attending events unless forced, lost weight in the face. For the first time in his life, charm did not work. What undid him most was not bankruptcy. It was irrelevance. The woman he used for emotional steadiness had turned out to possess more actual substance than the entire world he selected over her. Meanwhile, Aduni's punishment was social erosion. The women who once crowded her events began offering excuses. Her prayer group leadership passed quietly to someone less controversial. A younger socialite hostess took over the committee she had run for years. When she entered church, people greeted her respectfully, but too carefully. Respect without warmth is often just well-dressed judgment. At home, she became harder, then smaller. One evening, months later, Aduni sat alone in her sitting room while rain hit the windows and asked the question she should have asked before the wedding. Who was that girl? Not her bank value, not her ownership map. Who was that girl? But by then, it was too late for curiosity to become compassion. The answer had already grown beyond her reach. Amara restored Auntie Kosi's house before she bought anything for herself. The zinc roof was replaced, the walls replastered, the veranda strengthened, the mango tree trimmed, a borehole added, solar panels installed. She kept the front room simple, a carved wooden shelf, clean curtains, a framed photograph of Auntie Kosi, a smaller framed photograph of Emeka Okeke. She also created the Kosi Women's Enterprise Fund, a grant program for rural widows and fatherless girls starting small businesses in southeastern communities. No cameras, no giant banners with her face, just forms, training sessions, startup support, and quiet follow-through. People kept trying to persuade her to become more visible, to sit on magazine covers, to tell her story publicly, to build a personal brand from humiliation and resurrection. She refused, not out of fear, out of discipline. Pain can make people famous. That does not mean fame is healing. Instead, she learned board governance, expanded cold chain investment into underserved agricultural zones, and pushed Ebony Gate toward programs her father had considered but never completed. She became wealthy in the practical way, not just by inheriting, but by understanding. And with understanding came peace. Not instant peace, not dramatic peace, the slower kind. The kind that grows when your life finally belongs to you. She still had difficult nights when she remembered the church too clearly, the sting in her cheek, the weight leaving her neck, the sound of guests doing nothing. Trauma does not vanish because you become powerful. It simply loses the right to govern every room inside you. One afternoon, nearly a year after the wedding, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the Lagos office where she was meeting with regional managers. It was from Tundday, handwritten, final, urgent. Paul Diala asked if she wanted it set aside. She took it, held it, turned it once in her hand, then placed it unopened into a drawer. "Archive it," she said. Paul looked at her. "No curiosity?" Amara gave the smallest smile. I already heard his loudest answer at the altar. That was enough. People love stories where the humiliated woman becomes powerful because the ending flatters the idea of justice. But the truth is more complicated than that. Amara did not become worthy the day she learned her father was rich. She had always been worthy. When she was a little girl, washing one pair of socks by hand. When she sat in school without parents to clap for her. When she worked long days in Lagos and came home to a crowded room and still kept herself clean, kind, and disciplined. When she loved sincerely. when she was betrayed publicly. When she walked out of that church without collapsing in front of people who had not earned the right to see her break. The inheritance did not create her value. It revealed what the wrong people had failed to see. That is why the slap could not define her. That is why the beads could not erase her. That is why a family with louder money, louder clothes, louder prayers, and louder self-importance still lost to a woman who understood something they never did. Real power does not always enter a room making noise. Sometimes it enters quietly. Sometimes it has soft eyes and careful speech. Sometimes it comes from a red earth road and a dead ant's warning. Sometimes it lets people underestimate it for years. Sometimes it survives humiliation long enough to outgrow the hands that tried to shame it. The Baloguns thought they were discarding a disposable bride. What they were really doing was insulting the unseen foundation beneath part of their own world. And when truth finally introduced itself, it did not need to scream. It only needed to stand there long enough for everybody to understand who had been small all along. So, if you ever find yourself wounded by people who mistake your silence for weakness, remember this. Not everybody who looks alone is unbacked. Not everybody who comes from little stays little. And not every quiet woman is powerless. Some are simply waiting for life to hand them the key to the box. And when it does, the people who shamed them often discover too late that they were standing on borrowed ground the whole time.